topic. I could not find a kids video. I wanted to play on that.
Well, there's that. Sorry, give me a moment to get myself together then, because I was, like I say, I was caught off guard. Doo-doo-doo-doo. All right. So, will you pray with me, please? Holy One, loving Counselor, may our words and thoughts harmonize with your words and thoughts. Give us the grace to understand with hearts like yours, full of grace and mercy. In all your names, amen.
Amen.
So we were just talking about November 30th being the end of November and the beginning of, starting to get ready for Christmas and Lent and Advent and so on. So we are coming to the close of the Christian year. There is a cycle in the year, as some of you know. And next Sunday is the end of that cycle. It ends on Reign of Christ Sunday when we remember, or think about Jesus returning. And the new year, the new Christian year, begins with the first Sunday in Advent. And Advent is the 4 Sundays before Christmas. So December 1st is also Advent 1 this year. So we are coming to the end of that Christian year. And the readings become more and more apocalyptic. And I mean that quite literally. These readings this week and especially next week, they're full of imagery around the end times. Visions of fear and war and pestilence, of oppression and death and judgment. Somehow, being November in the Northern Hemisphere, it feels rather appropriate as we're looking forward towards winter. But these texts have been used within the Christian church as a means of warning. Whenever there's been war, from the early days of the church to the present. And currently, they're often cited by certain fundamentalist Christian denominations as almost blueprints for the final days and the return of Christ, which they see coming on apace. Many traditions look forward, actually, to that event, terrifying as it may seem to the rest of us. These traditions look forward to it as a fulfillment of prophecy, as the perfecting of creation, as the time when they and those like them will be lifted immediately to eternal bliss, the rapture, right? And so they want those days to come soon. This is why many fundamentalist groups support the nation of Israel so fiercely. It's not because, or not entirely because of political reasons. It's because some interpretations of those texts, as well as other texts in the book of Revelation, for example, indicate that Israel must become a major power and go to war against the adversary, which is defined different ways in different readings and so on, interpretations, so that identity is vague. But the adversary at Megiddo, which is identified as being a place within Israel, a plain of Megiddo, which is where the term Armageddon comes from. Right? So with that battle and that defeat comes the end of the world as we know it, and the return of Christ and the rapture of the blessed, and so on and so forth. And there are other signs, mostly from Revelation, but you'll hear people talking about them as well. People having numbers on their forehead or being given numbers, which is why way back when there was a lot of resistance to Social Security numbers. The rise of Rome and so on. So these traditions read these texts quite literally. And if you're interested in reading more about this and some refutation and discussion and analysis, I can recommend a book. It's titled In God's Time by Craig Hill. He was a professor of mine at Wesley. He grew up in a fundamentalist tradition, which literally believed in many of these things. But as he studied and read the text and went through seminary himself, he's now a New Testament scholar of note, especially of the letters of Paul and Revelation, he left that understanding and returned to the words of Jesus as reflected in his book's title. He examines and puts aside all those claims of those groups explaining why they were wrong. For example, the texts were written for the people of the early church who were facing, in fact, persecution. They were metaphorical and allegorical, and they were not to be taken literally, and so on. But one of his central tenets, reading as a Christian, as a progressive Christian, is the simple declaration of Jesus that no one knows when he will return. Only God. Jesus doesn't know the disciples. Jesus doesn't know the disciples can't learn it. No human will ever know. It will happen when it happens, and quite suddenly, without warning. Jesus says two people will be grinding corn together, and one will be taken and the other left. Two people will be in a field, and one will be taken and the other left. You know, if anyone had known, then they would have prepared for it, but we do not know. Jesus says it will happen in God's time. And currently, there are those who would take these texts as a reflection of modern politics in the West as well. That Christians are being persecuted and oppressed and denied the ability to practice their faith. A simple look around proves the falsity of that, I think, at least in the Western world of Europe and the Americas, much of Africa, and Australia. It's true that some individual nations have state religions that do not allow other faiths, or maybe any faith, to be practiced there, but there's very, very few of them. Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Iran, Egypt, China, North Korea, those are the ones that come to mind first. But in countries such as South Africa, Kenya, France, Bolivia, Mexico, Russia, the US, of course, the Philippines, India, Christianity of some form is either the dominant faith or is well recognized and tolerated. Recognizing other faiths is not oppressive to Christianity. I think we can all agree on that. So rather than see these readings as terrifying predictions of reality, much less trying to apply them to our own times, I think we can see them as ways to understand our lives when our lives seem to be falling apart. When it feels like our personal world is coming to an end, when there are wars and rumors of war, and we don't know which way to turn or how things can possibly get better, there is the reassurance that God has things under control, that all is not truly lost, that God will lift us up and help us. We've all had times like that in our lives because we're human, sometimes more than once. There's loss of a relationship, unemployment, maybe coming out, the death of a loved one, a parent, a partner, a sibling, or other health issues can all be stand-ins for the end of the world, can't they? Because they're world-changing. They are indeed the end of our world as we know it. We have to adjust to a new reality. Life without that partner. Life with a chronic illness, or life as we really are. Often that change, that end of the world, is not what we wanted. We grieve the loss of what we knew. And that's why coming out is both exciting, woohoo, yippee, I'm finally free to be all of me, and also very scary. How do I adjust? Who do I tell or not tell? Will I lose my job or not be able to find one? What will my friends and family say? And so on. But change can also be exciting in that way. A relationship that was no longer nourishing for either person. The opportunity to try a new career, to move to a new place, to meet the challenge of a new way of living. Not easy. It's not, I'll never say it's easy, but there's the possibility of hope and newness. When I was in my mid-30s, I left a job under, let's say, less than ideal circumstances. I found another one right away, but that loss made me think about what I was doing and why I was unhappy in the position. And that reflection woke me to the fact that I was not doing what I loved. I was doing what seemed logical and productive, and I was capable of it, and I could find work in it, and I was reasonably successful at it. But it didn't move me, and it showed in my performance. And so, I had to change, and I went to seminary. That loss, that change in my world, gave me the opportunity to reshape my life, to go in a different direction. It indeed felt, at the time, like the end of the world. But once I was able to pick myself up and look around, I realized I had been given another chance, another opportunity. Now, these second chances aren't all sweetness and light, of course. Just because we take that new opportunity and embrace the options and move forward, that doesn't guarantee that we will get what we had hoped for or even what we planned for. When I went into seminary, my thinking was I was going to be a United Methodist pastor. I would be going into the comfortable routine of the appointment system, where you're sent to a church and you're there for 5 or 10 years, and then they send you to another one, and you work your way up through the ranks, and you get a comfortable pension and parsonage maybe, and you retire at 72 or whatever, and you're all taken care of. But that's not what happened. Seminary led me almost directly to coming out, which meant a transfer to MCC, which is a whole nother world change, right? The point is, we all have so many times in our lives when life itself feels overwhelming. The changes, the new stuff we have to deal with, decisions that have to be made when we feel least equipped to make them. But these texts from Isaiah and from Luke are telling us that we aren't facing all that uncertainty alone. God is with us. God will guide us. We may feel abandoned, neglected, unloved, but we're not. God's strength and love are with us always. So when we face that end of our world, we can take a deep breath and move forward, trusting in God's presence at all times. In all God's names, amen.